Hey everyone, it's been a little while since I made a video like this one. So, Christianity, not only the biggest of the three Abrahamic religions that we're studying right now, but the biggest religion in the entire world. A little more than 30% of the world is Christian. And with a 2,000-year history, plus more denominations with various systems of belief, this is really too large a subject for a single video, so my ambitions here will be a bit more modest than that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Christian symbols, then do a brief history of how early Christianity managed to spread and grow into the size it is today. To that end, on the screen right now, we have the cross. Most Christians believe that Jesus was executed on a cross only to rise from the dead on the third day, and by doing so, make it possible for humans to be absolved of the sins they have committed on earth. There's all sorts of nuance and variations on that belief across different Christian groups, but there's little doubt that the cross is the single most recognizable symbol of Christianity in the world today. That doesn't mean, however, that it's the only one. In the early days of Christianity, the ichthys was actually a much more commonly used symbol. Ichthys is a Greek word that means fish, and it refers to this fish shaped symbol that today you will sometimes see affixed to the back of people's cars. In the earliest days of Christianity, the ichthys was much more commonly used than the cross. It actually comes from this sentence in Greek: Iesus Christos Theo Ios Soter. In English, that would be Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. If you look at the Greek words in that sentence and grab the first letter from each one, you get ichthys, which is the Greek word for fish. Since Christianity already had connections to fish, for example, the story about Jesus blessing a small amount of fish and bread and then using it to feed thousands of people, this fish shape became a popular but secret symbol for early Christians. Christianity was originally illegal in the Roman Empire, so having a symbol that the followers of the religion could easily recognize, but that wasn't obviously Christian, was a good thing to have. I'm going to switch to drawing mode for a second here to show you something else. When I was touring some of the earliest Christian catacombs underground beneath the streets of Rome, I also saw this symbol here that looks like a wheel or a pie chart. It's actually another way to write the Ichthys symbol. You just take each letter of the word and write them on top of each other. Watch. This first letter that looks like an I is called an iota. So, Mr. Murray's handwriting's great. Next letter is this. It's a chi. It looks like an X. So I'll draw that like this. After that, we have the theta, which looks like a big old circle with a line through the middle. Then we have the upsilon, which looks like a Y. And down. And finally, right here, we have the sigma, which looks like that. Boom, boom, boom. So all the letters written on top of each other end up with this little kind of wheel or pie chart shape. There's one more Christian symbol we should discuss because it's going to be important in a bit. This is the Chi-Rho, and it basically looks like an X and a P written on top of each other. The symbol actually comes from the word Christ, which in Greek is pronounced Christos and is written like this. If you take the first two letters in Christos, the chi, which looks like an X, and the rho, which looks like a P, and write them on top of each other, you get the Chi-Rho symbol. I know, you probably didn't expect this much writing and letters on top of one another. What can I say? Anyway, it's time to move on to some early Christian history. Before we start, please understand I am not even going to come close to covering everything. The history of Christianity, like the history of pretty much any major religion, isn't something you learn in a single YouTube video. Having said that, I'm going to do my best to give you a hopefully understandable overview of how Christianity first started to grow into the world's biggest religion. So, it starts here with a question. Were Christians still Jewish? Some early Christians argued that Christians were really just Jewish people who believed Jesus had been the prophesied Messiah, while other Christians argued that Jesus' coming had transformed them into something new and separate. This was an important issue because Judaism had always been a fairly insular religion, not seeking to convert others to their faith, and it was also a religion with several fairly strict rules that might deter outsiders from wanting to join, such as their pretty complicated eating rules. I've got a bunch of pork products on the screen, which Jewish people absolutely will not eat, but there's actually a good bit more to it than that. Animals that Jewish people ate had to be slaughtered and prepared in a certain way. You couldn't eat meat products and dairy products together, so cheeseburgers weren't going to fly, and a bunch of other non food rules on top of those. The group that believed Christians were a distinct group and therefore did not have to follow all the rules that applied to Jewish people won the argument, which set up Christianity to be a more attractive option for those who might wish to convert. Speaking of which, let's talk about this guy. This is Paul of Tarsus, also known as Paul the Apostle or St. Paul. And if there's one person who should get credit for pounding the pavement and spreading the word of Christianity far and wide, it's probably this guy. After being converted to Christianity himself, he spent the rest of his life traveling and teaching others about the new religion. And you see the map with the cities and places labeled on it? In addition to traveling around and speaking about Christianity, Paul also wrote letter after letter to each of those places, long letters explaining to the people who lived there his beliefs on just what Christianity was and just what it would be. Those letters he wrote actually make up most of the books in the New Testament, the uniquely Christian part of the Bible. The New Testament is only 27 books long, and 14 of those books are letters written by Paul, which is slightly more than half. Those 14 letters are about 50,000 words all put together. So, in addition to all the work he did spreading Christianity around in its earliest days, his words make up a substantial amount of the teachings Christians still look to today. Christianity grew, but there was also a fairly big obstacle in its way. This is the Roman Empire, and pretty much all of the early Christians lived somewhere within its boundaries. At first, Christianity was too small for the empire to really care about, but as it grew, some of the Roman emperors began to take notice. Some modern Christians like to talk about the days when early Christians would be fed to the lions by the Roman emperors. And while this was definitely not anywhere near as common as some people today would try to make you believe, it was definitely true that many of the Roman emperors discouraged Christianity to a greater or lesser degree, and more than just a few early Christians were put to death. This type of oppression by what was probably the most powerful country in the entire world at the time was enough to make sure that while Christianity continued to grow, it did so at a relatively slow pace. Then, something happened that would change everything. Along came Rome's 3rd century crisis. This was a 50-year long period of invasions, civil wars, rebellions, and basically every possible thing going wrong for the Roman Empire. I mean, in that one 50-year period, Rome had 26 different emperors. So your average emperor was lasting less than 2 years before ending up dead somehow. Here's a map showing where and how some of those emperors died, and I find it particularly instructive to look at how often those emperors were being killed by their own soldiers. Look at this. All these emperors that I've outlined in red were somehow murdered by their own troops. Anyway, one thing about Rome is it had always done a surprisingly good job of making sure that the poorest of its citizens were at least fed. During the crisis of the 3rd century, as the empire seemed to be burning down around them, the government decided it didn't have the time to worry about that, and the early Christian church stepped neatly into that gap. They would offer bread and shelter to those who would listen to their teachings, and won many converts in that time of hardship. I had this guy's picture up earlier. His name is St. Lawrence, and he was one of the early Christian leaders in the city of Rome. When the government of Rome decided it would seize the wealth and valuables of the church, before anyone could arrive to take the money, Lawrence quickly distributed it, all of it, to the hungry poor in the streets. When he was arrested and ordered to show the wealth and turn it over to the Roman government, it is said that he pointed to all the poor folks of the city and said that they were the true wealth of the church, and through those riches, the church was far wealthier than the greatest Roman emperor could ever be. I will skip over what the Romans did to him after that and say that by stepping into the government's traditional position of assistance to the needy, the early Christian church managed to grow still more. Then, all of a sudden, the crisis was over. Rome pulled itself back together, and when it did so, it noticed that the Christian church had grown significantly while it had been busy with, having its emperors murdered by their own men. Still, the biggest period of Christian growth was yet to come. In October of the year 312, Rome found itself in the middle of yet another civil war. The leader of one of the factions was a man named Constantine, who was not a Christian and up to that point had most definitely not been friendly to the early Christians. The great battle that would settle everything would be fought at a place called the Milvian Bridge, and the leader of the winning army was going to be emperor. According to Constantine, the day before the battle, he looked up into the sky, and written in letters of fire, he saw the words "In totoi nika," which is Greek for "By this sign you shall conquer." That night he dreamed that Jesus appeared to him and explained what it meant. The next morning, Constantine had all of his men paint the Chi-Rho symbol on their shields, and they went on to win the battle. Once he was emperor, Constantine passed a new law making Christianity legal, and then spent much of the rest of his life using his power as emperor, encouraging the religion to grow. These brown areas on the map represent areas that had a fair number of Christians during Constantine's reign, and the red line represents the empire's border at the time. With Constantine and the emperors who came after him pushing the religion, these areas in yellow represent where Christianity grew to after that. Whew, that may have seemed like a lot, but that was really just me hitting the high points. There is, of course, way more to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam than Mr. Fisk and I have managed to teach you over the past few days, but I hope you've learned at least a few things about each one. Let's see. I guess I need a secret word for this video. I think I've got it. So, remember the Emperor Constantine? Well, he was never shy about trying to make sure people remembered him, and right on this map you can see the city he decided to name after himself. The secret word for this video will be Constantinople, and since that's a proper noun, please make sure you capitalize that first C. We will have a test on what you've learned about these religions on Thursday of this week, so be thinking about that. In the meantime, please stay safe and stay healthy.